Listen up, my fellow coaches and leaders. The truth is, we all need a space to learn and grow so we can bust through our personal glass ceilings and step into our full potential, especially if we want to create the space to allow others to step into theirs. And that's where I come in. I'm not just a former clinical psychologist, but also a seasoned dream life and business coach with over 2 decades of experience helping people shatter their personal barriers and unleash their greatness. And here's the thing, you don't have to figure this all out on your own. As a heart-centered entrepreneur or industry leader, you deserve the best tools and strategies to help you and your business thrive. And that's why I'm excited to share my experience with you through the Coaching for Coaches podcast. Utilizing powerful combination of clinical skills, quantum physics, and strength-based coaching methods, I'll show you exactly what to do and exactly what to say to unleash your true potential and create a path for your clients to follow. And not just that, I'll also teach you how to build a thriving coaching business around your unique skill set and passions. So let's get started. It's time to answer your calling, make a lasting impact on the world, and create a lucrative living doing exactly what you love. Welcome to the Coaching for Coaches podcast, where greatness begins. Hey guys, it's Denise Walsh here, CEO of Dream Life Coaching. I am here to connect with you and to chat to the world's first and leading podcast booking agency CEO. Our guest founded Interview Connections back in 2013. Now imagine this. This was before social media had taken off. This was before podcasting was even a thing. And since its founding, Interview Connections has booked over 30,000 podcast interviews for over 800 clients. With a background in door-to-door community organizing, our guest is passionate about helping entrepreneurs who feel like the best kept secret grow their business online through genuine human-to-human connection. The podcast interviews she and her team have booked have helped their clients generate millions of dollars in sales, sell thousands of books, and transform countless lives. I, in fact, utilized this service back when I was starting my podcast, and it was an amazing help to help me launch what I'm doing now. So big coaches, welcome to Jessica Rhodes.
Hi, Denise. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to reconnect with you after all these years.
I know it has been a few years. I can't believe how time flies. But I wanted to bring you on because I am now certifying coaches and speaking directly to coaches who, number one, want to learn how to coach, which is what I help them with, but also then need to learn how to market it. And oftentimes will tell me, I want to start a podcast. You know, these are ladies who have big dreams and a big story, and they've got lots of wealth of information to share and a big heart. And so I think podcasting could be a great way for them to get their message out into the world. But before we get into what our clients should do, I want to hear a little bit about you. What brought you into the podcasting world before podcasting was even really a thing?
Yeah, so I got into this world in 2013. And at that time, and just for context, there are over 3 million podcasts today in 2024. And when I started, there were probably 200,000. There were not that many. So it was still very early on. There were no podcast booking agencies. Nobody said the phrase podcast guesting. Like that was not a phrase yet, which is like pretty commonplace now. Like I have the podcast guesting masterclass. But in 2013, it was very, very early on. People were starting, like entrepreneurs were starting to use internet radio. There was a site called Blog Talk Radio that was really popular. And that was kind of how people started doing these interview-based shows. And I was pregnant with my first child, who is now 11 years old, and I wanted to be home with him. I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. And so I was thinking about how could I still bring in an income to help support our family. And my dad, who is a business coach, told me about being a virtual assistant. And he said, I'll be your first client. You can read all my books about business and marketing, and you can be my virtual assistant. And so that's what I did. I started working in my dad's business, and he asked me to book him as a guest on podcasts and to help find people for him to interview on his podcast. And so I basically took my door-to-door community organizing and skills and applied it to connecting guests and hosts. And that's what really led into founding Interview Connections. Was there was this interest with people that I was reaching out to saying, wait, can you help me find guests? Can you help me be on shows? And I'm like, yes, I can.
Yeah. Well, I know that's how I was at the beginning. I'm like, I have this vision and all this energy, and I want to get my message out into the world, but there's a lot to learn, and you're kind of in your own office by yourself trying to figure it out. And so to have a team of people who put together my one sheet, who could do reach outs for me and allow me to do what I like to do, which is talk to people, it helped me keep my podcast going and allowed me to stay in my zone of genius.
Yeah, it's so great. And a lot of people, they want to be a guest on podcasts or they want to have their own show, but they don't necessarily have the connections of like, wait, how do I find these people? And so, yeah, I built my whole business around building a network, building a database of people that I could bring together for great interviews.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so back in 2013, and I say that internet wasn't even, or social media wasn't even really a thing, because 2013 skyrocketed our business. And because social media kind of started and we could post before and after pictures and we could tell testimonials and things. And so I can imagine that, did you feel like you had to kind of create your own path? We always say a pioneer has to carve their own way. And so did you have any resistance or anything at the beginning that you could talk about?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of that trailblazing
Yeah.
because with podcast booking, I mean, there were marketing agencies and PR firms, but they were all modeled differently than what I was creating. So there was no blueprint, there was no roadmap, there was no other podcast booking agency to say, here's how you do it. Like I'm creating it all. My dad's coaching me, coming up with different pricing structures and models and things like that. And yeah, social media was, Instagram, I had personal Instagram, but not people weren't really using it for business. I wasn't really super active on LinkedIn. I feel like now LinkedIn is really, people are using it, they're hanging out there, but it was really just Facebook. And I didn't have a following. I had been in a nonprofit working offline. So it was really just building those connections. And so ignorance was bliss, I think. I don't think I had resistance because I didn't really at that time. It was just one foot in front of the other. I didn't go into it thinking like I'm going to build this big company. It was very much a lifestyle business at that time. Like I wanted an income so I could stay at home with my baby. And once I started bringing in the income that was keeping us afloat, I mean, I was definitely like, wasn't rich at that time for sure, but it was enough to be like, wow, this is like I could do this. And this is really cool. This is really fun. And it was just like one foot in front of the other. And then as it started building and having legs, I'm like, oh, wait, could I actually build a 6-figure business? Like that feels crazy. And then I did it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, okay. What else could I do?
Right. And then you're like, does it have to be me? Could I hire people and expand my reach? And then we start talking about scaling. And yeah, that's super fun.
Yeah, it was crazy. I started bringing on virtual assistants, and I remember my first virtual assistant. Her name was Angie. That first hire was like, I need somebody who knows more about building a business than me. Like she had a lot more experience building her VA business, so I'm like, create systems for me. She like got me into different project management softwares and like really started building out this system that then I could plug other VAs into to help me book the interviews and things like that.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I have to tell you, some of the guests that I connected with even a few years ago, we still stay in touch. It's such a great way to meet like-minded people. And I often, if you want to find people who are 3 steps ahead, invite them to share their story on your podcast. And that's what we were able to do. And so it really built my network along with the business. So one of the first questions that I get, or one of the first things clients will tell me, is that they want to start a podcast. So talk to me a little bit about what you would recommend for a new coach. Should they start their own podcast? Should they be a guest first? What does that really look like and why?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, especially coaches, they think I want to start a podcast because they want to utilize the podcast medium, but it's so much easier to first be a guest on other people's podcasts because having your own show is a lot of work. It's coming up with the whole format. You need somebody to edit the audio. Like it's one thing to record the audio, but if you don't have anyone to level out the sound and put the intro music in and the outro and edit it all together, like when I started my podcast in 2014, I did that myself. And I'm like, literally one episode. And I'm like, oh God, I need a producer. I need a podcast editor. And then, that's a whole expense, and keeping up with the guests, keeping up with the schedule. You need to release your episodes on a regular schedule so your listeners know when to expect it. Like, it is a lot. And being a guest on podcasts is a way that you can get used to the medium. A lot of people who haven't done any podcasting, actually sitting in front of a camera and a microphone and speaking is nerve-wracking. Like, I mean, I've been doing it for 11 years now, but I remember when I first started being on podcasts and hosting, just literally speaking into a microphone was terrifying. I'm like, okay, what do I say? And so it is much easier to go on somebody else's show where they can kind of hold the reins, they can lead you through, they can ask you questions. You can really hone your message, because that's the other thing. If your message isn't super honed yet and you don't know exactly what your unique selling proposition is, you're still kind of working out the kinks of like, how do I share my story in a really compelling way that's entertaining but also valuable and gives people the highlights? Because if your business now and your coaching work is coming out of, a decade or 2 decades or however long of your life experience, you need practice. And like, what are the top points that are going to tell people that story in like 30 seconds? And so it takes practice to do that. And being a guest on a lot of different podcasts helps you become a much better speaker. And then you can decide, okay, I want to have my own show, or I just really like being a guest on other people's shows.
I have gotten great results with being a guest. I've had clients come to me and say, "Hey, I found you on this show," or "I found you here." And so when you find people that already have an audience and have done some of that legwork, and then you share your story well and lead them back to a freebie or a free group or however you're going to do that, it can be really a great lead source for your business. And I think that what you said is really important. A lot of us have this heart and this like desire, but we don't have the practice yet. And so being a guest can help you share your spiel again and again and again. And you'll probably say similar things most times. So then you can become really good at it. So go ahead.
Yeah. And when you start, and even if you start a podcast, because when I talk about being a guest first, I don't mean like, oh, be a guest and not have a podcast, because we need both. We need people hosting podcasts, we need people guesting. But when you host a podcast, you'll need to grow an audience, right? So you'll need to probably guest anyway as a way to market the show and build an audience. So that's why I always say be a guest first, start to grow your audience, start to get people following you who listen to podcasts, so that when you start a podcast, you've already got an audience ready to hit subscribe.
Absolutely. So let's talk a bit about how to be a good guest and how to tell your story in a compelling way. And I know this is one of your jams. You help people be excellent guests. And I have to say, as somebody who has interviewed a good amount of people, I can tell if someone is practiced and if they know what they're doing or if they don't. So it is a skill that you want to refine. So tell us a few tips that you teach within your programs.
Yeah. So, I mean, we do interview audits for our clients. And so we listen for this. And the tips I'm going to share are really important, especially for speakers. I want to say that because a lot of people come into podcast guesting, they love speaking, they've done talks, and speakers are actually the ones that need the most coaching sometimes as being a guest, because they tend to railroad over the host. And so that's my first tip. Know how to give a powerful answer that has a story, has actionable advice, is concise, and then know when to put a period at the end. And knowing when to actually end your sentence confidently is something that a lot of people struggle with, because they're like, have I said too much? Have I said too little? Do I need to keep talking? Is the host going to jump in? So know how to give an answer confidently, powerfully, and literally put the period at the end so that the host can jump in. A lot of guests will just talk and talk and talk, and then like the host needs to interject, and then that's awkward. So give an answer, end it powerfully, and let the host say what they want to say.
Right. Because the goal is that this is a conversation and that this is a two-way street, that the host and the guest are communicating. This is not a monologue or a keynote. And so having it flow back and forth is really helpful. And I know one thing that you did to help me was the one sheet that said possible questions. And so then I learned the answers to those potential questions and was able to get short, concise answers to allow for that conversation to flow.
Yeah, absolutely. And having stories for all of your different topics just in mind, kind of having that arsenal of stories that you could pull from. Some interviews and some podcast hosts are going to be much more actionable. They're going to ask you for tips. It might not be as story heavy, but always having some stories, because listeners do connect more emotionally to stories. They connect more emotionally to hearing the humanness of your experience and of that of your client's experience. Especially as coaches, you want to showcase the types of breakthroughs that you've had, the types of breakthroughs that you've helped your clients have. One of the biggest investments that I ever made in a coach, I worked with Allie Brown for 2 years, which was a very high ticket investment to help me scale our company to 7 figures. And listening to her podcast on a consistent basis was a big part of moving the needle to making that investment, because she interviewed so many people she had coached. I could see myself in their story. They talked about where they were when they first started and how they got to where they are and the experience working with Allie. And I'm like, oh, I can see myself in that story. And then that started to put me in the shoes of, oh, being Allie's coaching client. And that's a huge part of what got me there. And so sharing stories of your clients, featuring your clients, having those types of conversations is a great way to, do an effective interview, and also to get clients from it, which is a big part of what I teach, is how to actually do this effectively so it grows your coaching business.
So what types of questions would you recommend be put on a one sheet? Or what should a coach, if she were to think about, what do I talk about? What stories do I share? What should I have people ask me? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, absolutely. So think about what your ideal clients' pain points are. Like, what do you help people with? What is the value that you bring to your clients and to your target audience, so that when a podcast host is reading your one sheet and considering, oh, should I bring this person onto my podcast, they can see from your topics and your suggested questions, they could get an idea of what the answers might be and think, oh, this is going to solve my listeners' problem. And so I always ask people when I'm helping them with their one sheet, what are the pain points that you help your clients to solve? And then also, are your clients aware of those pain points? Which is something to really contemplate, because sometimes what you help people to solve when you're coaching them is actually something that's like the first step is you getting them aware of what's in their blind spot. So perhaps some of your topics and questions are actually helping you to talk about what might be in somebody's blind spot that then is holding them back. Like, I know you talk a lot about, trauma and things like that. And so maybe what's holding someone back from starting their coaching business is actually nervous system dysregulation and trauma. And so maybe your topics are like the thing in your blind spot that's holding you back from actually moving forward. And so that creates some curiosity. So having topics that pique their curiosity. You want to avoid topics that seem really self-serving. Like, why is your coaching business the best in the world? Like, nothing that's going to look like you're just trying to sell your service, but it has to be super valuable.
Right. But like, if you were to ask me that question, I could talk about it forever, right? And I could and that answer would lead people to the program. Like, this is why you need my program. But it creates that curiosity and gives me an in to talk about why this piece of it is so important, and potentially having a testimonial to share of somebody who came in, or a client I worked with, or things like that, allows you to have a 2 to 3 minute answer that moves the needle and takes people on a journey. And the goal is that they end up saying, I need that program too.
Yeah, absolutely. And having topics and questions that are unique to you, like if you have a signature method or 3 pillars of something, or something that there's clearly a 1 2 3 step 1 2 3, 3 different parts, 5 different things, like something that is kind of concise, where the host reads that and they're thinking, all right, there's going to be a real solid answer to this. It's not something that's open-ended or just like anyone can talk about. But how could you take a topic that maybe a lot of other coaches do coach on, but how could you make it unique to you so that the host sees that you are a uniquely valuable guest to talk about this subject?
What do you feel like is the biggest pitfall coaches make in their marketing efforts on podcasts that impact sales?
So, I mean, there's a few different pitfalls. The first biggest pitfall is not being consistent enough and committing to their brand awareness and their marketing long term. there so many coaches want the immediate ROI of clients because that's what we all want. We all want clients, but oftentimes we're short-sighted and thinking, okay, I'm going to do this marketing thing. I'm going to start this podcast. I'm going to go be a guest. And if in 3 months I don't have any clients from it, I'm going to do something else. Then I'm going to do Instagram. Okay, it's not working on Instagram. Okay, I'm going to go do LinkedIn. And you're ping-ponging around trying everything for like 60 to 90 days. It doesn't work fast enough. And then you go to something else. And usually when someone says, oh, podcast guesting didn't work for me, I didn't get any clients from it, they didn't commit to it long enough. Really committing to it long term, focusing on excellence instead of just throwing the entire strategy in the garbage can and trying something new. How could you tweak it? How could you improve your bio so you capture more people's attention? How can you be a more effective guest? How just practice more. Look at the shows you're being a guest on. What is the response from ask the host, what could I have done to be a better guest for you today? Like, give me that feedback. I'm trying to be as valuable and as an effective guest as I can. So I want your feedback. Like, really focusing on excellence is huge. So many people don't take any responsibility for their results and they just say, oh, this didn't work. The strategy didn't work. I was great. The strategy didn't work. And it's like, girl, maybe you weren't great. Like, you're wonderful as a person. That's not about your worth, but your skills in delivering your story, your ability to share a story in your answer that creates that emotional connection so that people are magnetized to you, maybe could use some work. And it takes practice. It takes years and years of practice to really become excellent in any skill. And so I think the biggest pitfall is just they stop too soon and they don't take responsibility for the results. Because if you're on a podcast with 50 people who are your ideal client, you should be able to generate some leads from that audience. Right. If you think you need to be on a show with 1,000 people or else it's not going to work, then it's not the size of the audience. It's actually your skills as a guest.
Right. Right. And so doing it consistently enough to become excellent, to practice, get feedback, and continue to learn. And what I appreciate about podcasting is you're not just learning one skill, you're learning several different skills: how to ask good questions, how to guide a conversation, how to, share your story concisely, and then how to make the ask at the end. I know for me, when I started, I didn't have a program. I just had a lot to say. And I wanted to add value in a fairly easy way to my current team and beyond as I grew outside of my network marketing organization. But I didn't have a place to lead them to. And so it was really a fascinating journey through the years where I finally created my program and I finally had something to lead them to. My audience was warm. And they immediately said yes, because I actually opened the doors to something they could say yes to. So how would you, like, as a guest or potentially even as a host, get clients without seeming salesy?
Yeah. And that's huge, because that is really, if I could talk about another pitfall, it's not giving that call to action. It's having that next best step for people to take so that they can work with you. And so there's kind of two different ends of the spectrum. Sometimes the pendulum swings from one end to the other, and either people are way too salesy and too desperate to the point that they're repelling opportunities, or they're at the other end of the pendulum and they don't want to give any type of call to action because they don't want to, be too salesy. They don't want to turn people off. And they're like, oh, I don't want to say anything. And so you have to find that middle ground of having that confidence that what you offer is so valuable and having a free opportunity for people to connect with you. So with coaches, I always want to ask, like, what works for you now for the clients that you have now? How do they go about finding you? And what is the journey that they take to investing in your coaching program? If they're finding you by word of mouth and referral, what is that next step when somebody refers them to you? Do you get on the call with them? Do you have them watch a video? Do they go onto your email list? What happens between the point of them learning that you exist to them investing in your coaching? Like, what are those steps? And oftentimes you want to keep those same steps, but instead of it being a referral that's feeding you the lead, it's the podcast audience that's feeding you the lead. And so guiding them on similar steps to ultimately working with you. So for a lot of coaches, it ends up being a discovery call, a strategy session, a breakthrough call, some type of conversation where you can talk with them. And even if they don't sign up and join your coaching program, they still get value. And that's what makes it an appropriate call to action for a podcast, is that the listeners will get value whether or not they end up making the decision to invest. And so that's why it's appropriate for a podcast. It could be joining your free Facebook group. If you've got a free Facebook group and you're doing live trainings and maybe some 5-day challenges, a way for people to kind of get into your ecosystem, you could send them to a Facebook group. But having a place for people to go where it's easy for them to say yes, join your community, join your email list so that you can then interact with them and then effectively nurture them to the point of them deciding if they want to invest in your program.
Yeah, I love that. Thinking about what does my ideal client really need, or think they need, because again, sometimes we sell them what they need or what they want and give them what they really need.
Exactly.
And so what do they really want? What is your client really looking for? What's keeping them up at night? What are the things that they're going to say, yes, I need that, and then create a freebie around it, or put it in your free Facebook group, and that's how they get that thing that they really need, is by joining your ecosystem and building that like, know, and trust factor with you. Now, one other question I have is, we can do and I've done a ton of interviews, right? And they're now off in Spotify land. and I wonder, what else could I do with these interviews? How can I multi-purpose them? How can I use them myself, even if I'm not the host, to have some more evergreen marketing, or put them other places?
Yeah, I love this question because shifting your mindset as a podcast guest to first like see the value in the content that is being created for you will increase your gratitude so much. Like every podcast interview that I do as a guest, I'm so incredibly grateful because I'm like, this is such a great piece of content that I can't wait to use and to share and to promote and edit and all of that good stuff. So that is first and foremost. This is well, I wouldn't say first and foremost, because I think first and foremost is your relationship with the host. But for this question, yeah, repurposing the content is huge. You have to see how powerful it is for you to have a video where you are featured as the expert, where a trusted authority figure in your industry is asking you questions about your story and your expertise. If you are not sharing and repurposing that, you are leaving so much money on the table, so to speak. Like, it's a huge missed opportunity to not do anything with that content. So, number one, share it with your prospective clients. Most business owners and coaches are not closing 100% of the prospects that come to them. When you share a podcast interview that you did as a guest on a podcast that's relevant to them, they listen to it before having a call with you, before really deciding if they're going to work with you. That will increase the likelihood that they invest because now they'll be warmer. They will know you at a deeper level. So using it in your sales process is a really great way to repurpose. Like when I email somebody that has booked a sales call with me, I give them a link to an interview I did on a podcast. I said, if you'd like to learn more about me and our story, listen to this episode of a podcast that I did on someone's show. So that's a really great way to repurpose it. You can also edit clips from the interview and then post them as TikToks, Reels, short form videos on any type of social media platform. I use this really great AI tool called Get Munch, and I just put the YouTube link into the video that I did, and then it edits out all these different clips, puts captions on them, and then I can export it to use it on TikTok. Always tag the host, then leave a link to the full episode so that way the host is getting full visibility and credit. But creating short form videos from podcasts, that will solve, if you're like, I don't know what to make a reel about or a TikTok about, you can really get your creative juices flowing. Just use clips from podcasts. And then before and after you're actually a guest on a podcast, like the day of the recording, after you record, like after we finish this interview, I'll pull up my phone and do a quick video for Instagram. Like, hey, I was on Denise's podcast. We talked about this. That provides a piece of fresh content. So there are so many different ways you can leverage the interviews that you're doing as a guest to get more visibility on social media.
Yeah, you're right. Talk about it beforehand. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I get to be on XYZ show today. What do you think I should talk about? Or do you have any of sometimes I've asked, what's my favorite exercise that you've seen me do that you think I should read, like get your audience to be in conversation. And then afterwards, that was so fun, and take a picture and tag and post. And then taking the audio or the video and then turning it into reels can be such an easy thing that can create multiple streams of content for you. I'm going to have to check out Get Munch. I've been using Opus Pro. I'm sure they're similar, but yeah, you
Yeah.
take the link and then it gives you all the stuff that you can just pick and choose from and repost, and it doesn't have to be hard.
Yeah, Munch got me with an Instagram ad, so I saw the ad and I was like, this looks amazing." Because
Yeah, I need
previously
that.
I was just using like iMovie and editing it myself, and then it would never get done because I was personally like watching this whole video, finding the clips, and so when I saw this ad, I was all in.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
good.
exactly. Yeah, there's so much to learn as an entrepreneur. And sometimes we have to decide, is this a skill I really want to learn and get better at, or is this a skill I want to outsource? And so when there's a option to easily outsource it and get some help, it's powerful. So anything else that you think that you've learned over your decade plus of experience working with guests that make them stand out?
Yeah, well, focus one thing that I'm seeing a lot now in 2024 is how much hosts really value the collaboration and the relationship with their guests. So a lot of people, right, like people come for what they want, but then you give them what they need. I know people come to podcast guesting for the visibility, for the, visibility to new audiences, and you get that 100%, but the thing that I always consistently tell my clients is focus on your relationship with the host of the show, because especially as coaches, you want to have a really healthy network of referral partners. And so there are a lot of coaches, but every coach has a slightly different specialty. Even if they're like two coaches who coach on the same thing, those two coaches have completely different stories. They are two completely different people. They have different energies, different vibes, different values. And so even two coaches that have a similar focus in their programs could be excellent referral partners if somebody comes to them and they're just like, we are just not quite the right fit, but I actually know a coach that would be perfect for you. Maybe one coach does all one-on-one and the other is 100% group, but the person who has a group program gets somebody that wants one-on-one and they say, you need to go work with this person. So really see that podcast guesting is a way for you to grow your network of referral partners, of business besties who can be sending you leads, who can be doing, joint venture webinars and joint Instagram lives. I mean, the way we grow is through networking, through relationships, through people who know us at a deep level. And when you're a guest on podcasts, you have the opportunity, the space, the time to go deep with your story and to allow people to get to know you better than they could with a short form video or a short form piece of content. Those short form social media posts are excellent for grabbing attention, for keeping people engaged. But for them to really get deep and really understand if you're the right fit, they've got to spend some quality time with you. And podcast interviews provide the perfect opportunity to do that.
Yes, amazing. Amazing. And so you said 60 to 90 days is not quite long enough. How long would you recommend for somebody to give themselves, like, all right, I'm going to work this for 2 years and really hone my skills? Like, what would you say?
I mean, I will say my most successful clients have been with me for 5+ years. So I think personally, I do think it's a strategy that you should just be doing all the time.
Mhm.
A year, like give podcast guesting a full year. There's such a ramp up period, podcasts, you get the interview booked and then you record it and then it goes live and then it takes time for people to listen. So there's such a ramp up period that even after 6 months, maybe you only have half the interviews that you even recorded live at that point, maybe even less. So it really does take time for the process to be in full motion. I've got clients that after a year of podcast guesting, they didn't see an ROI, but then a few months into their second year, everything popped off. It just takes time for everything to build, for all of the interviews to get booked, recorded, go live, and then for you to really hone in and get clarity on your messaging and get clarity on the different types of shows that would be a good fit. So I would really recommend that if you're going to invest in podcast guesting, that you have a very long-term view, because ultimately it's going to feed the top of your funnel. It's going to consistently get visibility. It's going to build your footprint online. Like, we didn't even talk about the SEO value of podcast guesting, but if you've got a website, the more people are linking back to your website, that will increase the number of times Google is going to show you on the first page of someone's search results when they're looking for what you do or when they're Googling you. So to build your footprint online, you need a lot of backlinks, and podcast guesting is the easiest way to get backlinks.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. It's consistency, it's honing your practice, it's honing your skills, and it's using this one piece of content in multiple ways on lots of different platforms, and it turns into evergreen options for you. People will be able to build that like, know, and trust factor while you're sleeping because they're in Australia listening to your podcast. And so it really becomes a powerful marketing tool for you. And I agree. Years later, we still have a podcast. We're still adding value. We're still bringing on guests. We're still interviewing clients because we know that it's in my zone of genius, and clients like build like, know, and trust factor because of it. So if we have somebody here who is wanting to become a guest or wanting to start their own podcast, what is the first step they should do to get to know Interview Connections?
Yeah, I have a free masterclass. It's called our podcast guesting masterclass. I teach it on Zoom 3 days in a row. Each day is just one 45-minute session. So I'm giving you just exactly what you need to get started. I'll teach you how to build your podcast one sheet. I'll teach you the strategies for monetizing. So if you liked this interview and you're like, okay, I want more of this, I want to do podcast guesting, our masterclass is the perfect next step. So you can register at interviewconnections.com/live masterclass, interviewconnections.com/live masterclass. We do it almost every month. So whenever you're hearing this, you can just go to that URL and then sign up for the next round.
Perfect. And we'll put the link in the show notes below. But you guys, if you've been brewing the idea of starting a podcast and that sounds like a big jump, because it kind of is, start with being a guest. Let's figure this out. Let's get a good microphone. Let's learn the software. Let's hone in your story, and then you can certainly grow and build your own podcast out as well. But I think podcast guesting is a great place to start. So thank you so much, Jessica, for sharing your story with us. I'm proud of you for taking an idea over 10 years ago, 11 years ago, and paving a way in an industry that wasn't even really created yet, because you are the ones that people now follow. And so I know for you, or for me, you guys helped my business grow when I was trying to figure it out. And I really appreciate your heart and your work that you helped me with. So,
Oh, Denise, thank you so much. This was such a joy to come on and to reconnect with you. And I'm so happy for all the success that you've had in your business with your show. It's just so great to come back together for this interview. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, you guys, check out the live masterclass. Learn as much as you can from Jessica and Interview Connections. And I can't wait to hear your first interview as a guest. That's not my show, because I know a lot of you have been interviewed by me, but let's do it other places and start really building your network. Have an awesome night, you guys, and we'll see you next time.